Last week, I broke down the top 12 running backs for the fantasy football playoffs. Let's do it again, but for wide receivers. I'll tell you, this one was a lot tougher. So many big name wideouts this year have been busts, have gotten injured. This was tough, but I managed to do it. So let's go through it. Based on schedule, based on target share, and all the underlying analytics, here are the top 12 wide receivers for your fantasy playoffs. And as with running backs, we're going to start at the top with number one because a little less surprising here. Number one is going to be Ja'Marr Chase. That's right. Ja'Marr Chase has been the one guy that if you draft him in the first round, you are perfectly pleased with. No questions going forward. This Bengals offense has gotten better as the season has gone on. He's got an elite quarterback with Joe Burrow, who has stayed healthy. And Ja'Marr Chase, well, he's leading the league in receiving yards and touchdowns. What more can you say here? What's really the most impressive thing is that he's done this despite sharing the field with another elite wideout. Really, the only question is, where does T. Higgins fall on this list, which you'll find out soon. At number two is a guy who actually might be at the top had he not missed 5 games. It's Nico Collins of the Houston Texans. Here's a crazy stat for you. Out of all wide receivers, he is second, tied for second, with 4 100-yard games. Only Terry McLaurin, with 5, has more 100-yard games than Nico. And Nico has played only 8 games this season. So half of the times he's been on the field, he's gone for 100 plus yards. Again, imagine if he didn't miss those 5 games. He was already the undisputed wide receiver one in this offense. And then with Stephon Diggs done for the season, there is no doubt. What really the only surprising thing is Tank Dell has been such a non-factor, and that has not changed. It doesn't look like it's going to change. Only 1 catch last week against Jacksonville. Yeah, I don't care about anything else in this offense in terms of the passing game. It's all Nico Collins. That's not going to stop. I have so much confidence in Nico these days. If you look at his playoff schedule, it's actually not that good. Miami Dolphins are one of the top against wide receivers in limiting fantasy points and gets the Chiefs in Arrowhead, and then Baltimore for the championship game. But I really don't think it matters here. Nico has been just such a stud this year, and Stroud is going to continue to look his way. If you have Nico, you're good. Now, at number 3, you go with the veteran Mike Evans. That's right. Might be surprised to see him this high on the list, but you shouldn't be. You know Evans is going to cash in on another 1,000-yard season, but he's going to need to play catch-up to do it after missing a chunk of the season himself. And it's going to happen because Chris Godwin also is done for the year. He's not coming back. Evans' target share is just going to continue to be insane. There's not a single other receiver that, well, you can probably even name unless you're really deep into fantasy or a Tampa Bay Bucks fan, but nobody's going to threaten his target share here. And even Cade Otton, the tight end, his targets have fallen off since Evans has come back. Despite not being the youngest or the fastest receiver in the league, he's third among all receivers in win rate. He just gets open, and of course, if it's anywhere in his radius, he's catching it. And Baker is going to continue to look to him over and over again. The touchdown upside, and I have him this high also partly because the schedule is so good for the Tampa Bay Bucks down the stretch. Week 15 at the Chargers. Okay, decent, not amazing matchup. Then he gets that Dallas Cowboys defense. We know how they've looked lately. And then for the championship, potentially in Week 17, the Carolina Panthers. Evans just coming off a game against that Carolina defense. 8 catches, 118 yards, and a touchdown. You might want to have that in your lineup for championship week. And then number 4, it's probably as low as we can go on Justin Jefferson. So here he is. Now, it feels like Jefferson isn't dominating lately. I mean, he had a 99-yard game in week 13, but still, he hasn't had any of these huge games lately. But what's even more concerning is where are the touchdowns? All of a sudden, in the end zone, they're looking for tight ends, looking for Jordan Addison. Aaron Jones is even scoring more than Justin Jefferson these days. After scoring 5 times in the first 6 games, he hasn't had a touchdown since week 7. But again, touchdowns, it's something that comes and goes, hard to predict. Got to feel like he's going to hit pay dirt eventually. And if nothing else, he's getting you a super high floor in terms of reception yardage. You don't really even need to justify starting Justin Jefferson. But look, for what it's worth, he leads the league in 20-plus yard receptions, and he still has that high ceiling. It's going to come, and there's nothing to be scared of with his schedule. Number 5 wide receiver for the fantasy playoffs. Let's go with Puka Nacua. Now, Puka doesn't really have a great schedule here for week 15 through 17, facing Niners on the road, the Jets on the road, and then Arizona. So no cupcakes, but I will say this 49er defense, of course, not nearly what it was early season, last season, so it's not terrible. Jets defense as well. They are still tough against receivers, not gonna lie, but like we're talking about a guy who is #1 in the league in targets per route run. We know that he is undisputed the #1 target here for Matt Stafford. Cooper Kupp a close second, don't get me wrong, but Puka has definitely established his dominance since coming back from injury. His season-long numbers are a little bit skewed, even his averages, because he had that first game of the season where he got hurt, and then that one random game after he came back where he only caught one pass. But let's just look at the past 4 weeks. He's third in the league with 98.5 receiving yards per game. And I do think it matters that the Rams are a team that are just going to be fighting for their playoff lives here at 500 right now. They're going to need to continue to win. They're going to continue to throw the ball. Puka is going to be a big part of whether they make the playoffs or not. And since we're looking ahead to the playoffs, I want to also remind you, you can set your NFL picks for an underdog ahead of time. But right now, if you're looking ahead to week 14, the best pick you can make is the free one. If you're new signing up to Underdog for the very first time as a new customer, you get this free pick. It's Justin Herbert just getting 1 yard on Sunday. Take the higher in 0.5 total yards, you win that pick, and you can win your very first time doing NFL picks on Underdog. But make sure that you use code NGAME when you sign up, because you get the freebie, plus you still get up to $1,000 of bonus cash on your first deposit. Now, as far as playoff wide receivers for fantasy, number 6 is going to be T. Higgins. I know it's rare that we see the #2 receiver on an offense going to be as high as a top 10 receiver in fantasy. But here's the question, is T. Higgins even the #2 receiver? And I mean that in seriousness. Over the last 2 games since T came back from his latest injury, fully healthy, he has more receptions, more yards, and more targets than Ja'Marr Chase. And in fact, over the last 2 games, the only wide receiver in the league with more yards than T. Higgins is Jerry Jeudy because of that 1 week. Now, I can't tell you that I would prefer Higgins over Chase because we know what Chase can do any given game, but we can't just dismiss Higgins as the 1B or the 2 here. I mean, he's getting just as much of Joe Burrow's attention as Chase. He has just as much upside in this offense. I mean, you have to say T. Higgins, just like Ja'Marr Chase, is a must start. At number 7, probably one of the most pleasant surprises of this season for fantasy, Courtland Sutton. I mean, there's never been a dispute that he is the #1 target in Denver. The question was, how good would that offense be? How good was Bo Nix going to be? And would Sutton take a step back from last year or move forward? And it's pretty obvious now what he's done. We've seen this Denver offense really come alive over the past month. In the past 4 weeks, Courtland Sutton is the wide receiver 4 for fantasy in terms of PPR leagues. He is 3rd in receptions and 2nd in total air yards. He's getting those high reception totals, the chunk yardage, and he's scoring touchdowns, pretty much doing it all, and that's not going to change here. And I'm putting him this high because as Bo Nix continues to develop and get better, and you know, we might see even better numbers from Sutton, but also the schedule. In terms of adjusted strength of schedule for the rest of the season, weeks 15 through 17 at least, where it should matter for fantasy, Courtland Sutton has the 4th best schedule for all wide receivers. We're talking about Indianapolis, the Chargers, and then, best of all, week 17, it's that Cincinnati defense that's looking very suspect these days. Now, wide receiver 8 is going to be DJ Moore. Also a great schedule, but more so, again, look at just the last 2 weeks because the big change in Chicago changed for the better, we can all say. Thomas Brown calling the plays, now in charge, actually, of the whole team. But no more Shane Waldron, no more messing around. Get the ball to your best receiver. I mean, Keenan Allen, look, he's actually been just as productive. He's scored more touchdowns than DJ Moore, but they have equal target share, and DJ Moore has done more with his targets. And you just got to feel better about Moore in terms of his yak ability, his ability to stay on the field. He is the #1 target there. So DJ Moore, I think, is going to be the guy you want. He's actually the #2 fantasy wide receiver just over the past 2 weeks since that change was happening. There's still some big name wide receivers that haven't called out yet, and some that might not even make this list. But you might be wondering, where is the sun god? Here we go. Wide receiver 9, Amon-Ra St. Brown. Couple issues with St. Brown, why he's this slow compared to where you'd expect. The schedule is definitely hard. I mean, it's one of the worst among all these receivers. Gets that Buffalo, very tough defense. At Chicago, who knows about weather, and Chicago is still a pretty good pass defense. And then at San Francisco. I mean, not ideal here, but also we know this Lions offense, they don't always have to pass the ball. And I'll tell you what, those touchdowns come and go. And he actually has a lot of his fantasy point percentage from touchdowns, and that's not what we expected from St. Brown. So hasn't had quite the high ceiling in terms of yardage compared to last year. Still a great receiver, still top 10. There's no question that you're starting him, but I just don't think he's a guy who will necessarily go off in the fantasy playoffs. And number 10, maybe I'm being optimistic here, but I think Calvin Ridley could go off in the next 3 weeks. He gets that Bengals defense, the Colts, and then the Jaguars to finish things out. Look, he's about to face the Jaguars in week 14. I call him a boom. I think he's going to have a monster game. He could do it again by the time that Jags team is basically packing it in before the season is over in week 17. Now, last week was kind of a dud for him. I know Nick Westbrook-Akine keeps taking those touchdowns away. Ridley's time will come, and I think it could start this week. Look, before last week's dud, he had been rolling. He was in the top 12 in basically every wide receiver category, and especially in terms of yards per game. At number 11, the receiver who's probably picked it up the most lately over the past several weeks, it's George Pickens. We know the quarterback change was all he needed, and he continues to roll. I mentioned this briefly because I also think he's going to boom this week in week 14. Hopefully that helps some of you get in the playoffs if you need it. He's been averaging 81 yards per game since Russ took over, and that even includes that snow game where he couldn't do a whole lot through the air. He's going to get right again this week. He's going to go off. He's a player that's going to get those big plays, those long touchdowns, which is what you're looking for, weekly upside. He's third in total air yards this year, and he's fourth in air yard share. And look, with Calvin Austin potentially out this week, who knows, maybe longer, he might even get more. I will say I don't love Pickens' schedule on the road against Philly and then Baltimore and then KC in week 17. So I don't know if he'll do what he did last year, carrying some teams over the final 2 weeks. But, I mean, he's got so much opportunity here. He doesn't really need to thrive on volume. He just needs to get a couple of those long shots and he can pay off. And number 12, this might surprise you, Jakobi Meyers. Just can't ignore his insane target share over the last couple weeks. I mean, it's been consistently high since Davante Adams left because, let's face it, they got nobody else to throw to outside of Brock Bowers, who is a tight end, and they can't run the ball very well. I don't think that's going to change, but look, the schedule is just too good to pass up. I had my doubts about Myers the last couple of weeks because they faced some really tough defenses in the Chiefs and the Broncos, and it didn't matter. He went off anyways, and now he gets the number one best schedule for a wide receiver, gets the Falcons, gets the Jaguars, and gets the Saints on those 3 weeks. A crazy amount of targets, a crazy good schedule, and for what it's worth, at the very least, Aiden O'Connell is an upgrade over Gardner Minshew, so everything's in place here. I really think Myers could wind up being one of those sneaky league winners at wide receiver. Yeah, there's some really good receivers who did not make this list. Let me just briefly tell you why. The guy that I had the closest, if you want to call him number 13, that's fine. It's A.J. Brown. Now look, A.J. Brown, you're starting him, no questions asked. It's not anything wrong with him or the offense, except for we might have a Saquon problem. They're running the ball so well, they just really don't need to throw it as much anymore, take those deep shots or be aggressive. And this has been a factor for a while now. Maybe some people don't even realize. Over the last 6 games, he's only been a top 20 receiver in PPR leagues twice. We're not even just talking lack of huge games, not even top 20 for fantasy. So AJ Brown, I mean, he could explode any given week. So you have to keep him in your lineup, but I don't know if he's necessarily going to be a top 10 playoff receiver. And you probably figure that the number one pick in a lot of fantasy leagues, or at least the number one receiver, CeeDee Lamb, should be on here. Well, there's some questions, and it's not even really about the quarterback, Cooper Rush. He's been fine. The insane target share is there. The schedule is okay. It's just, you got to wonder, first of all, is he really right? That shoulder, there's a lot of risk here. I mean, one more landing on that shoulder and he could be out for a while, maybe even pack it in for the season. Are the Cowboys going to pack it in for the season? I'm still starting Lamb, but again, I just don't feel like he's going to put up elite numbers because we don't even have him as a must start anymore. Tyreek Hill, I mean, hate to say it, he has not been elite this season, period. The lack of big games, I mean, truly big games, it's actually kind of astonishing. Tyreek Hill has only gone over 100 yards once this entire season, and that was in week 1. And touchdowns, only 4 all year. Cooper Kupp could make a good case for him. He gets targeted like crazy. He's in that same Rams offense with Puka Nacua. But again, I just feel like Puka is the number 1 guy there. He's the one who's been thriving since returning. He seems to have a leg up on Kupp. And while I feel Drake London is close to being a no doubt wide receiver 1 for fantasy, we suddenly have some quarterback concerns there with the way Kirk Cousins has looked lately. There you have the top 12 fantasy wide receivers for the playoffs. And if you need help getting in the playoffs, you just need to win this week, or you just like winning in general, make sure you check out the Week 14 playlist with start sit advice and more.